To discuss today's topic, Hezbollah's plunge into the Syrian abyss. It's a very dramatic title, Randa, but it reflects the very dramatic nature of what's unfolding in Syria and spilling into Lebanon, and the very profound implications the conflict in Syria is having on Hezbollah. The movement's decision to join the fight in Syria, its all-out engagement in the Battle of Qusair, clearly reflects a shifting set of priorities for the organization, from playing the role of the resistance movement to now playing the role of the defender of Syrian, Iranian, and very narrow Shia interests. And it brings with it many risks for Hezbollah, which we're here to discuss today. I just want to remind people that the days when the Arab world held up Hassan Nasrallah as one of their favorite leaders was not that long ago. But now the Party of God is being called the Party of Satan by mainline Sunni clerics like Yusuf Qaradawi. And Hezbollah's radically changed status in the region has led to a growing confrontation between it and Sunni militants. Why has Hezbollah made this particular set of calculations? What are the risks and dangers of playing the new role they're playing? And how are these calculations affecting Hezbollah's role in Lebanon are among some of the questions Randa will be addressing today. She's recently back from Lebanon, where she's been talking to Hezbollah about its decisions, and she's going to shed some light on their thinking and the impact that their engagement in Syria is having on their status within the Lebanese Shia community as well. How long will that community want to send their young men to fight and die in Syria? And there are a few in this town who understand, who know Hezbollah better than Randa. She meets with them often, she writes on them. She's writing a book currently on Hezbollah. When she's not covering the Party of God, she's leading Track 2 dialogue and peace-building efforts in the Middle East and Central Asia. She currently co-moderates the Middle East Dialogue, a Track 2 initiative to monitor and analyze emerging political and security dynamics in the Arab world. She's also an MEI Scholar and an adjunct research fellow at the New America Foundation, and we're absolutely delighted that she's here with us today. So Randa, without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Kate, very much for your kind introduction. I'm grateful for the Middle East Institute, its leader, Ambassador Wendy Chamberlain, and its fearless Senior VP, Kate Seeley, for hosting me as a scholar over the last 18 months. Being a scholar, I've gotten to meet and work with a great MEI team of scholars, staff, and interns, and it's really a true pleasure and honor to be speaking at MEI today. I will be addressing most of the questions that Kate has just mentioned as to being the focus of my presentation, and those I won't address in my presentation here. We can address them in a question and answer session. I'm much better at question and answer than just speaking. Let me first talk about Hezbollah Syria narrative and how it has evolved gradually along with their changing role in the Syrian conflict. I think that narrative has passed through four stages. And I've just come up with these nifty titles for each of these stages. The first stage being a denial stage, no, we are not there at all, we are not involved. And that was in the first 4 to 6 months of the crisis in Syria. Then it's a self-defense phase. This is when news started surfacing of operatives dying in Syria, Hezbollah operatives dying in Syria. And that's the argument that was made then by Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. These were members, residents of Shiite majority, Lebanese Shiite majority villages inside Syria, close to the border with Lebanon, and they were defending their homes, their businesses from attacks from the rebels. So that was the second phase. The third phase is which is interesting for Hezbollah, was a sectarian phase. This is when they talked about the duty, the Shiite duty to defend Shia shrines. And they weaved this argument by saying, well, we are doing this not because these are Shia shrines, we are doing this because, and Sayyid Nasrallah in one of his speeches said, we are doing this because we are trying to prevent the wider regional Shiite-Sunni war. And that's when he brought the example of the attack on the Imam Askari Mosque in Iraq. In Samarra in 2006, and how it has led to a civil Shiite-Sunni war in Iraq. And his argument that by defending Sayyida Zainab's shrine in outside Damascus, we are trying to prevent a civil, a sectarian war between Sunni and Shia, not only in Damascus, in Syria, but also in Lebanon, in Iraq, everywhere. That was the third phase. And then the final phase is the phase that they are most familiar with, which is the resistance phase. And this is the argument that he offered in his last two speeches on May 25 and June 14, when, again, we are back to this idea of Syria is facing a cosmic conspiracy by the US, Israel, and the Takfiris and their backers, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And this conspiracy is targeting now Assad and the Syrian regime, and once they are done with that, you know, they're going to come after us. And in that respect, Hezbollah, what it's doing now in Syria, it's defending itself. And he said, and I'm quoting, only stupid people won't defend themselves. And what we are doing in Syria is defending ourselves by going to the Takfiris in Syria rather than them coming after us here. And he goes over and over and to great length in explaining why this is not a sectarian fight as far as Hezbollah is concerned. And I'm quoting, in his last speech he said, the dispute in Syria is between two sides, two axes, two projects. It's not between Sunnis and Shia. It's not between sects. Now this evolution, this gradual evolution, and the craft and the time that Sayyid Nasrallah have spent in crafting this narrative is indicative of the fact that one, they felt they had to bring their constituency along. Two, that they have a problem in the wider Arab Muslim world when it comes to fighting militarily and openly on the side of Assad. Now, why did they get involved? When did they get involved? I think the turning point in their assessment about Assad's chances of political survival was July 2012, when a suicide bomb planted inside the regime inner chambers killed 4 of the regime's senior officials, including Assad's brother-in-law. I think until then, Hezbollah was in Syria, but not necessarily in a fighting mode. They were advising the Syrian army leadership. They were working with Iranian advisors operating in Syria, very much the same modus operandi they evolved in Iraq, working with the IRGC there during the American presence in Iraq, helping train the Shabiha, the pro-regime paramilitary organization, and had intelligence operatives on the ground. And it's interesting that in numerous conversations, Hezbollah officials will tell me that they relied on their own operatives on the ground to track developments rather than relying on Syrian regime information. And so the decision to up the ante on Hezbollah involvement was made around that time, and over a short period it evolved into what we are witnessing today. So why Hezbollah is in Syria? Primarily and foremost to protect its resistance project and its regional role, which are interlinked and projection of Iran's interest in the Levant and in the region writ large. It's not just there. I've heard a lot of analysis about, including some Lebanese politicians who says, well, Hezbollah is in Syria at the orders of Khamenei. Well, that relationship between Iran and Hezbollah has, over the years, evolved into a more nuanced relationship. It stopped short of being a true partnership. It's still, there is a senior-junior kind of order between the two, but it's a much it's a much deeper relationship than a patron-client relationship in the mode of Khamenei orders and Nasrallah executes. It's a relationship that is built on shared ideological, religious, political interest. There is now a lot of personal and family links between the leadership, you know, families that have now married from each other, and so there is this personal aspect. A lot of politics in our part of the world is very much relational, and that's part of it. There is a solid basis of mutual trust between the two parties that has been tested and nurtured over the years, which doesn't necessarily exist between, for example, Iran and Syria, does not necessarily exist between Hezbollah and Syria. And there is a deep sense of loyalty from Hezbollah toward the Iranian leadership, toward the role they have played, their support, their stand vis-à-vis Hezbollah. But also there is a lot of respect from the Iranians for Hezbollah's military achievements. But still, and most importantly, it's a relationship that is driven by a shared geopolitical interest, principally among them undermining U.S. interest in the Middle East and specifically in the Levant. Now, what's interesting is that what's happening in Syria and the potential implication if Assad, now there is a weakening of Assad, and if Assad were to basically disappear from the political scene, is that will reinforce the interdependent relationship between the two. Hezbollah now is Iran's most trusted and reliable associate in the region, albeit junior associate, and Iran is now Hezbollah's single strong and reliable ally. And in the future, depending on what happens in Syria, it might even take more roles than that. One of the most revealing phrases in Sayyid Nasrallah's speech on June 14, his last speech, was when he said the following when talking about Syria, and I'm quoting, "We don't like this battle, parenthesis, in Syria at all. We don't like it. We like the other battle, in parenthesis, with Israel." End of quote. Nasrallah did not say this to earn some freebies with constituencies in Lebanon and in the region. As he said time and again, Hezbollah's involvement in Syria carries a lot of risks and consequences for them domestically, inside Lebanon, and regionally. And he kept repeating, and he repeats it in every speech in the last 4 speeches, the risk of which Hezbollah is aware and consequences they are willing to live with. So let's talk a little bit about some of these consequences. And I'm talking about them in terms of challenges, and I'll categorize them in terms of 3 big challenges. What I call a Shia challenge, a Sunni challenge, and an Arab challenge. On the Shia front, I have mentioned a little bit in my foreign policy piece, which is available outside, about the mood inside the Shiite community about Hezbollah's role in Syria, which it's a mood that is dynamic, that is evolving, that is in flux, depending on what happens inside Lebanon and what's, especially in light of the recent Sidon events and what's happening in Syria. Now, when we talk about the Shiite community, again, we need to be a little bit more nuanced in understanding the layers within this community and their relationship with Hezbollah. I think there is a very strong inner core within the Shiite community. These are the fighters. These are the employees in Hezbollah's social service organization. These are the families of the martyrs. These are the business partners. These are the people who are ideologically affiliated with Hezbollah. And most of them are Shia, but some of them are not necessarily Shia. This is a solid core that Hezbollah can rely on no matter what. But this is a percentage, and maybe I would say 20 to 30% of the Shiite community. The Shiite community writ large includes people who are supporters of Hezbollah, but we are talking about them in terms of political support. And that relationship between that larger outside layer with Hezbollah is mediated by a number of factors and elements. There is an identity affiliation that, it's a Shia party protecting me as a Shia in a country where political sectarianism is the rule of the game. There is a relationship of pride an element of pride. Look where we are, Shia, depending on where we were, and it's thanks to Amal, but mostly thanks to Hezbollah. So there is this kind of pride, loyalty based on that. And the third element, also security. People now have bought into this idea of Hezbollah's weapons are, a means to my personal security, are a means to my family security. And that's shared not only by the small core circle, but also by the larger community. In fact, not long time ago, I was talking with a person whom I considered one of the a minority group of Shias in Dahieh, in southern suburbs of Beirut, who are anti-Hezbollah. Definitely anti-Hezbollah. And this person, that was around the Sidon event a week ago. And she said to me, after seeing all these men with beards, no offense to anybody with beards here, meaning by the Salafis appearing in Sidon, appearing in, and this is a person who has historically been anti-Hezbollah. I mean, to the core, anti-Hezbollah. Well, maybe we need Hezbollah. It's that kind of now feeling that is taking shape even within that small group of the Shia community that is anti-Hezbollah, vehemently anti-Hezbollah. So within that, let's talk about the Shia community writ large now, including the small circle and everybody. I think the argument of which Nasrallah drove in his last two speeches about their military involvement in Syria, which is a preemptive war argument. We have to go into Syria, fight them there, mainly Takfiris, instead, and preventing them from crossing over into Lebanon. I think that has been accepted, in majority. However, the acceptance did not come with a blank check. I think it's a conditional acceptance. It's an acceptance that's going to be conditioned on how long the fight will be. I don't think there is yet. It doesn't mean that Hezbollah cannot develop that through their impressive PR machinery, or Nasrallah himself can make that argument, and he is a great communicator and lead attorney for the party. I think we are not there yet, and the party has not yet achieved a consensus around a protracted, open-ended involvement in Syria beyond what right now they feel is necessary to protect the Shia community. So the Qusair argument, when you talk to people, even people in Hermel, which is closely affiliated, Shia in Hermel, these are political supporters, not the fighters. When you talk with them, the first thing they said, we understand, we get Qusair, we understand Qusair, but we don't get Aleppo. And the argument is that Qusair is viewed as necessary to establish what is referred to me as a rebel, Takfiri-free security zone next to their villages, next to the border. And that should be enough of a buffer zone. It reminds me a little bit of Israel's security zone, in southern Lebanon against the Palestinians. It's the same argument driving that discussion within the Shiite community. We understand the need to do Qusair. We understand the need to continue to stay in Qusair, but we don't understand the need to go to Aleppo, because that is not going to be necessary to protect us, to protect me, Ali, to protect me, Khadija, in Hermel or in Dahiya or in South Lebanon. And the feeling is motivated by not narrative, but by two considerations. The first consideration is that people now are arguing, by being in Aleppo, by being over this, in Rif Dimashq, by being in Dar'a, Hezbollah is mixing its priority. We, Shia, want Hezbollah to defend us. His priority is to defend us at home and not to get distracted from the home front. And I think the Sidon events and the discovery of the large weapons depot in the hands of Al-Asir and company, and the same thing being said about Salafis in Tripoli, has increased or has heightened that concern, is that Hezbollah need really to take care of us first. And the fear is that by being too deeply involved in Syria, that will detract them from taking care of security of Shias inside Lebanon. But then the second argument, which is more nuanced and more interesting, and which comes from the larger community of Shia, not the core group, is as follows, which taps into the feelings inside the Shiite community of being in minority in a Sunni majority region. And the argument goes is that Syria now is a proxy for a wider Sunni Shiite sectarian war. And by getting too deeply involved there, by maybe, causing too many defeat, and I'm quoting here, we are poking the Sunni bear. And we have no business poking the Sunni bear, Lebanese Shia. And that's an argument driven by the larger, the non-Hezbollah core group Shias who have businesses in the Gulf, Shias who have businesses in Africa, people who are, look at themselves as cosmopolitan. The Shia identity is important to them, but also being an Arab, being part of this region, doing business in this region is now, and part of the success of this group of people is partly due to Amal and to Hezbollah. In a way, they are now paying part of the limitation that's going to be placed, or it will be placed on Hezbollah by this segment in the community, is due to the actual success of Hezbollah in empowering politically and economically this group. So there is a fear that deeper involvement in Syria will jeopardize these economic successes, these political successes that we have achieved, because as the argument goes, in a sectarian war pitting 10 to 15% of Shia against 90 to 85% of Sunni, the former stand to lose. So this is the Shia front. Now the Sunni problem. On the Sunni front, I think there is, as you all know, there are two major divides in Lebanon on Syria. There is a north-south divide, and there is a Shiite-Sunni divide. And the more acute of these two divides when it comes to Syria is the Shia-Sunni divide. And with, of course, the Sunnis in the great majority supporting the opposition, the rebel cause, and the Shia with the great majority not necessarily supporting Assad per se, but not wanting to see the Assad regime fall for fear of an anti-Shia Sunni Islamist regime replacing Assad. It's a nuanced difference. It's not as much support of Assad per se as of a fear of the alternative. Now, the Sunni problem is not a creation of just yesterday or because of Syria. I think it has been in the making. The Hezbollah Sunni problem has been in the making since 2005, since the death of Hariri. Until 2005, we have to remember that the relationships between the different political components inside Lebanon, including Sunni-Shia relationship at the political level, was mediated by the Syrians. They were the ones who were in charge of that relationship. And so, over time, Hezbollah never got to develop a network of relationship, haven't developed the know-how and the trust in the Lebanese Sunni political class. Hariri, in the last 4 years, before his death, I think, or 3 years, if I stand to be corrected on the exact number of years, started having this one-on-one meeting with Nasrallah. And that was part of, and Nasrallah wanted to have this one-on-one meeting, partly of this trying to develop this trust, but also for other political consideration. Once Hariri disappeared from the scene, was assassinated, there was no longer a Sunni interlocutor of Hariri's gravitas, of Hariri's legitimacy, of Hariri's authenticity inside Lebanon, with whom Nasrallah and the rest of the leadership related to. They tried what they could in developing links inside the Sunni community, but they used the rule and divide rule, by picking people whom they felt share their ideological message of resistance, by relying on Islamists, because this is a natural constituency they could develop links with Sunni Islamists. At one point, they struck a memorandum of understanding with a Salafi Da'iya in Tripoli of a Shahal name, different from a Da'iya Shahal, who is now the Salafi leader in Tripoli. That memorandum was basically frozen under pressure on the Salafi leader from his fellow Sunni Islamists. But the real problem of Hezbollah when it comes to Sunni is that it has always looked at the Sunni problem, or at their lack of through two lenses. They have looked at it either through a sectarian lens, meaning this is an old problem, this is part of the Sunni Shia competition that 1400-year-olds, it's now taking new forms. It's something that we can do something about, but we have to live with. But also they have looked at it and looked at the Sunnis in Lebanon, especially Samura and the other of March 14, as being proxies of the US Zionist Saudi conspiracy against Iran and the resistance axis. And so instead of looking at the Sunni problem as an internal domestic governance challenge, and when you look at it as a governance challenge, I think the way you can deal with it is different than if you frame it within these two lenses that I have identified. For example, the failure of Nasrallah time and again to apologize for the May 2008 incursion in Beirut. This is something that I don't get, because when you speak with Hezbollah operatives, even with Hezbollah senior leaders, they understand why this needs to happen. But at the same time, they come up with all these excuses why it's not going to happen. But they understand the psychological impact of an excuse and its need and how much it can do in healing a wound that has been festering ever since, and that today they are paying the price for, including what's happening in Saida, including. Now, the problem with the Sunni problem is not only Hezbollah's doing, but also there is definitely, especially recently, we have been seeing a manipulation, an increase, a trend of strong anti-Shiite radicalization that is taking shape inside the Sunni community, especially poor, lower middle classes in rural area and some urban centers. I mean, Al-Asir is one such product of this radicalization. The fact that you had Sunni Islamist parties come into power positions in different parts of the Arab world has emboldened that group. The fact, and we can go into question and answer, the fact that moderate people like Hariri has been absent, self-exiled or exiled for so much time has created a political vacuum that these people are trying to mine. But there is definitely a Sunni anger that needs to be attended to, and that can be attended to. And in fact, there is more, I mean, again, what baffles me is that there is more common ground between a Nasrallah of the world and a Hariri of the world on the basis of a shared interest of preventing the Salafis, Al-Qaeda, from basically taking root inside the Sunni community. And yet, both sides are unable or unwilling, especially on Hezbollah's side, unwilling to really build on that shared interest and move forward with it. Finally, I will talk about Hezbollah's Arab challenge, which I think many of you are familiar with. But for most Arab public, Hezbollah has become the worst case scenario it has always striven not to be, which is it's now a Shiite militia. In Syria, they have lost the veneer of any cross-confessionalism. They have developed through the support of pan-Arab Palestinian cause, and they have lost their appeal among leftist nationalist groups which were drawn to the party's founding principles for social justice and support of the weak and the oppressed. For the majority of Arab public, it's now Hezbollah is part and parcel of the oppressor camp. Now, the longer the conflict in Syria protracts, and the deeper Hezbollah's involvement in Syria, I think Hezbollah will face a conundrum. On one hand, to rally the base around an open-ended involvement, the easier argument, the easier sell will be the sectarian argument. But it is that same argument that's going to drive drive the larger Shiite that I talk about, the political supporters who are very afraid of the Sunni Shia competition and the impact on their livelihood. So it will drive them away. It will also deepen the Sunni Shiite polarization inside Lebanon and drives Hezbollah away from the Sunni Islamist camp. So what will Hezbollah do next in Syria? Now, until now, Hezbollah has, not until now, but Hezbollah is well known to carry usually a fairly well-crafted balancing game between its geopolitical role and interest and its domestic, its base political and economic demands, until really the last year with the Syrian crisis. But also Hezbollah in the past, as we have seen in May 2008, has shown an absolute ruthlessness when it felt that its resistance priorities are being threatened. The primacy then of that resistance project trumps any other consideration, despite, as Nasrallah keeps repeating, the cost and the consequences. And I don't think they have changed that, despite the fact that they have lost the support of the Arab Sunni Islamist street, which until recently, at least a year ago, they still were able to count on, thanks mainly to their anti-Israeli credentials. Hezbollah today feels it's not on the line. It feels that they will be the next target if Assad were to be, you know, if the Syrian armed opposition were to win. And what they are doing in Syria is borrowing a page from Assad's playbook in Iraq in 2003 and 2004, when he felt at the time that the Americans were coming after him once they finished with Saddam in Iraq. And so at the time, Assad's goal was to keep the Americans bogged in Iraq, keep them there as much as possible, using whatever means they could muster, and including the Salafis and the Takfiri groups that are today fighting Assad and Hezbollah in Syria. I think Hezbollah and Iran's objective in Syria are to get the Syrian opposition and their backers bogged down in Syria, prevent them from achieving a military victory over Assad and eventually coming after Hezbollah. The worst case scenario is a Syria ruled by an anti-Shiite Islamist Sunni regime that is bent on undermining Iranian interest in the Levant and weakening, destroying Hezbollah. While they must know, and I think there is now a shared feeling that their best case scenario of restoring Syria to the status quo ante is no longer achievable militarily. The societal polarization is too deep to be healed again. Their least worst option going forward is instability and political vacuum in Syria. And in an Iranian-American or Iranian-Saudi match over who is best skilled at mining a political vacuum, I would bet on the Iranians anytime. So final few words, if I can, about the impact of the Syrian conflict on Lebanon, specifically on the refugee situation, on the dynamics in Lebanon. And I won't speak about two impacts, just in light of what happened in Sidon. The first impact is short to medium term, and the second impact is long term. As you all know, Lebanon is now home to the highest number of Syrian refugees. If we take Sidon, for example, as of last May, there were 2,300 Syrian refugee families living in Sidon. There were 2,200 families, presumably Palestinian refugees who left from Syria, who have entered Ain al-Hilwa refugee camp. Now, the reports are still to be confirmed, but what the army has said recently, has issued in terms of reports, that they have arrested a number of Syrians who were fighting with Assir against the Lebanese army. I think this is a phenomenon that we need to watch very carefully, the mobilization and the militarization of the Syrian refugees. The deterrence factor, or the limiting factor to date, has been that 75% of these refugees are women and children. However, as Syria fragments, as the opposition might be losing more ground in Syria, there might be a movement from these men who stayed behind, either fighting with the FSA, with the rebel groups, or at home defending their villages, to join their families, to join their wives, to join their children in Lebanon. And we have the making of a guns for hire phenomenon. These are battle-hardened militant who can, in a way, in the future, play a role, project themselves as a player in internal Lebanese fights, similar to what the Palestinians did at the beginning of the civil war in the 70s. And this is something that is a worrying phenomenon, and the fact, again, that so many of them were caught fighting with Assir should be an indication of the beginning of a dangerous trend within that population. The second impact is more the long-term impact, is how these refugees will impact the social and demographic makeup of a small country like Lebanon. Let me give you some facts. Today, there are more Syrian babies born in Lebanon than Lebanese babies. Today. As of last May, according to the Association of Relief Agencies working on the ground with Syrian refugees, there are 1,183,000 Syrians, a total of 200,819 families. Lebanese officials expect 1 million officially registered refugees by the end of this year, 2 million by the end of 2014. That's in a country of 4 million. Syrian refugees, again, according to Lebanese government sources, are scattered across 1,400 towns and villages in some of Lebanon's most economically and socially depressed area. In 35% of these towns, they are the majority. A large group has been in Lebanon now for more than 2 years, and this life is starting to acquire a form of permanent settlement. Now, as the conflict protracts in Syria, Syria's absorption capacity of IDPs internally displaced people, because of the destruction that is meted against the infrastructure there, will shrink further. And we are going to see more of that population also shifting to become refugees. So even if the war were to end this year in Syria, studies with refugees show that on average 70% of refugees stay in their host countries for 5 years after the war in their home country concludes. This is a population that might stick around Lebanon for a long, long time, depending on how long the conflict protracts in Syria. And it is bound to impact in the long term the demographic makeup, which is the basis of this fragile political formula by which Lebanon is governed. And whenever these formulas are threatened or upended, as we have seen in the 70s, Lebanon usually goes headlong into a civil war. So these are at least two impacts of the refugee crisis that's worth starting to pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Randa. Clearly, we're going to see a very different Lebanon and Syria emerging in the future.
We might be seeing Bilad al-Sham coming all over again, you know? I mean, we are seeing the remaking of Bilad al-Sham.
Well, yes. You would make many an Arab nationalist happy if that were the case. I have got some questions, but I think I'll open the floor first. I just want to note we have many people in the overflow rooms. There are question cards in the back that will be brought forward. So let me just begin with David Mack, but please do others identify yourselves.
Yeah, I'm David Mack, Middle East Institute scholar with you, Randa. And I've been impressed by the degree to which you have recognized that Hezbollah often has a very astute understanding of geopolitics. My question is, do they understand that 3 or 4 major external actors have really been trying to prevent the spillover of the Syrian turmoil, the first being Turkey, the second being Israel, and the third and fourth being Russia and the United States, which just today introduced resolution for the extension of the U.S. military observer force in Golan.
Do you want me to answer that? I don't see that kind of nuanced understanding. I really believe that they now strongly believe that it's an existential fight. But at the same time, I don't see that they are wedded, both Iran and Hezbollah. I should say Iran more than Hezbollah, to the survival of Assad, political survival of Assad. I think when times come for a negotiated solution, and eventually we are going to get there, eventually it's going to end up with a negotiated process. How? Who knows? But we'll get there. I think you are going to see Iran being a pragmatic actor when it comes to Assad's future. But I think the cost is going to be what happens to Hezbollah, because that's going to be the critical elements in Iran's approach to a solution in Syria. Now, in terms of their understanding of Turkey, Israel, when it comes to Israel, I mean, there's not. They look at it as a zero-sum game. What's good for Israel is bad for us. What's bad for us is bad for Israel. When it comes to Turkey, their mindset has shifted. Turkey now has become an integral component of this Sunni-led Saudi conspiracy. They have become more sectarian in looking at the Syrian crisis. They have always had this sectarian mentality, this sectarian attitude. But in my opinion, the sectarian attitude has now taken over in their political calculations, partly because I feel that the other camp is a sectarian camp, and Russia and the U.S. U.S. for them is the big evil, and so I think Russia definitely for them again their new understanding of the world now is pivoted toward the BRICS, and Russia being a major part of the BRICS. So going forward, I expect more rapprochement and Russia playing more of a role in that axis, with Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran.
So you're basically saying Hezbollah feels it had no choice but to obviously do what it's doing in Qusair and also in Aleppo. But do you, so this is what Hezbollah says, do you feel that Hezbollah could have made other strategic calculations that would not have invested so deeply into this very sectarian conflict?
An interesting question. I don't know. Maybe yes. I mean, Hezbollah could have basically, for example, after Qusair, it could have inserted itself into Qusair and then announced we are coming out. Everybody was announcing, I think the Battle of Qusair was going to happen no matter what. Hezbollah had no choice with the Battle of Qusair. It felt that depth needed to be secured, for a number of reasons, strategic, Shiite population, the whole thing. So they had to. But after Qusair, I think once Qusair was secured, once Qusair was won, again, the community would have understood staying in Qusair. But I think beyond Qusair, the role now that they are supposedly going to be playing and are planning to play in Aleppo and others, I think this is something that Hezbollah will pay dearly for. And I wonder if they have really thought through the long-term consequences of this. Partly is their underestimation of the opponent, and I wonder of their opponent. Yeah, I mean, you get this, maybe not the rebels, because I think the Battle of Qusair has shown that the rebels are now close to being a match when it comes to motivation and fighting capacities, but the opponents in general, their political opponents in Lebanon, you feel, and you have, one senses it since for some time, is this creeping arrogance in the way they talk about the other side, in the way they talk about, the enemies, or especially the opponents domestically, and partly because they have been able to achieve and win, and whereas the other side, whether it's on the Syrian opposition side, has been divided and fragmented, and whether it's on the Lebanese opposition side, has been divided and fragmented and not getting its act together. Yes,
Thank you. I'm Michael Thomas. Reportedly, General Dempsey has now recommended that the United States provide arms and training to the Lebanese army.
Yes, it's happening. I mean, it's providing, no?
Yeah. I'm curious, in the first place, who has to approve that within Lebanon? I mean, who does he deal with to get that cleared?
Yeah.
And then secondly, what would be, I mean, it would obviously be sold as an effort to help an ally defend itself, but it would be seen, obviously, as a hostile act by Nasrallah. I mean, what would be the reaction of the various political factions in Lebanon to that?
But there is already, has been for some years now, a program in place, whereby the U.S. Army is providing, training, light weapons, and all kinds of other kinds of assistance. And I've got to the tune of how many billions of dollars. And so I don't know how much this program is different from what already exists, if it's not just adding on what exists and expanding it a little bit more. And in the past, the program has taken place. On one hand, Hezbollah is saying, we want a strong army. We are where we are. We have our weapons because we don't have a strong army. Once there is a strong army, then there is no need for us to be, militarized. And so it will be very hypocritical if this training were to come, and then Hezbollah saying, oh, we don't want that, we are against it because it's American. So that's why in the past they did not oppose that training, and partly because they felt the training is really not that a big deal to really change the military balance that exists on the ground in Lebanon. Now, the difference is the geopolitical context in which this is happening. I mean, after all, there are now U.S. soldiers being positioned in Jordan, and so if Hezbollah were to interpret this offer and this sending of 24 or 36 soldiers as part of this conspiracy, you know, to attack Assad and to go against Assad, I think in this respect it might oppose it, just because of the context. In the past it has not opposed it, but now because of this new context it might oppose it. But also it all depends on what kind of assistance, how it is different from what already exists. But I can see the potential of them saying, oh, this is, you know, part and parcel of what's happening in Jordan, part and parcel of what's happening in Turkey, and that's just, you know, another element of that game that's being played. So the fact that, and so again, will this program be folded under the agreement that already exists between the Lebanese government and the US government in terms of the training? That's one thing. So it won't need, I guess, approval or recertification. But if it's something new, it's something different, then you might see, in my opinion, some opposition from Hezbollah about that. Yes.
Thank you, Randa. Melissa Maley with Denton's. You talked about Hezbollah's relationship with the Sunni community in Lebanon. Could you talk a little bit about the impact of Hezbollah's Syria policy on its relationship with the Christian community and with the Druze, and particularly how is the March 8th movement, is it going to weather this, and the impact on the upcoming or forming a new government?
Well, I would argue that in terms today, in terms of domestic politics, in terms of amount of time, human resources being devoted by Hezbollah to domestic politics, it's minimal. I think the domestic file has been subcontracted to Amal, to Berri, with certain understanding being negotiated, with Berri knowing exactly what are those red lines he cannot bypass, that he has to, you know, go back to Hezbollah whenever he approaches any of these red lines. But in terms of actual managing that file, in terms of relationship with except the relationship with Aoun, and I will get to that, but for example, the relationship with Jumblat, the relationship with other members of the March 8, I think they really now trust Berri as being their voice and their... Now, in terms of Aoun, there is a problem there, because there is this personal antipathy that exists between Berri and Michel Aoun, and Hezbollah is often called upon to step in and negotiate that, how to say, misunderstanding that frequently arises between Aoun and Berri, you know, the last of which is going to be extending the mandate of the leaders of the security forces, including the head of the Lebanese army, to which Aoun has already, you know, put himself on the line saying, I totally oppose, and Berri is saying, oh, I'm going to have a session and we're going to, you know, pass the decree to extend that mandate, including that of Qahawashi. So, and you are going to expect Hezbollah to step in and, you know, try to mediate that fight when it comes to it. Jumblat is a very interesting political operator. You know, you can say anything about Jumblat, but the fact that he is where he is, representing 5% of the Lebanese population, the power that he has, and the, you know, booby traps that he has been able to successfully navigate is just amazing. And he will continue to play the same kind of game, you know, reaching out to Hariri by sending Faour to Saudi Arabia as he did yesterday. And then at the same time, you know, continuing the relationship with... March 8 has nowhere else to go. I mean, they are stuck with each other. Everybody is... Today's in Lebanon, the political configuration are not likely to change until we know what happens in Syria. I think whether it's March 14 or March 8, they're going to stay pretty much. The centrists are going to stay pretty much the centrist. Everybody is awaiting at least to see the beginning of the light in Syria. It's so now confusing, and everybody is betting on their side winning, but at the same time developments happen on the ground and suddenly my side is not winning and the other side is winning. So you are going to see continuing the status quo to continue. Now, whether Tamam Salam will be able to form a cabinet, I think the formula that he wants, which is a technocratic cabinet, 888, is not likely to fly. Hezbollah does not feel the situation is so threatening to make such a concession. I personally think they will keep pushing the envelope on having a political, you know, cabinet. Jumblat, the weather vane of Lebanese politics, has been lately arguing that Hezbollah must be included in the cabinet. And I don't think Hezbollah, given what's happening in Syria, given the volatility in Lebanon, will trust not being in the cabinet or, you know, indirectly represented in the cabinet. He will not trust a technocrat to represent his interests. So we will continue to be in the stalemate until they reach a formula whereby We again have a political cabinet and not a technocratic cabinet. But in terms of political configuration, I don't see major change happening to those. And I will argue that once Assad, there is a Assad demise, and who knows if this happens or not, March 14 will stand to lose more than March 8, because part of its raison d'etre has been, anti-Assad. Once Assad is no longer the way, in the scene the way he was, then there are a lot of rifts within that coalition that might bring it apart.
Let's take two questions at once. We've got the fellow in the bow tie and the gentleman next to him. Can you handle two at once?
Yes.
Yes, Jeff Prepti with the Syrian Emergency Task Force. I was just wondering, what do you make of Hamas having come out with statements urging Hezbollah to withdraw from Syria?
Mm-hmm. All right. Shall I answer this or another question?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Nabil Khouri, currently in transition from the State Department to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I wanted to go back a bit to the question about the Lebanese army and the equipping of the Lebanese army. Something very interesting happened in Sidon the last week. Al-Asir, the Salafi militia, confronted Hezbollah people in Sidon. The Lebanese army came in and heroically, quote unquote, defeated Al-Asir. That left Hezbollah as saying, God bless the Lebanese army. Hezbollah in the past has said specifically about American weapons and training to LAF, fine, we're happy with that. The question then is, who controls the Lebanese army and whose Lebanese army is it? A question which is now being asked by Sunni leadership in March 14. It's also causing a bit of a rift between the Sunnis and the Christians within March 14.
Correct.
So the question is very much apt, but it is a question of...
not only Hezbollah.
We keep hoping that the Lebanese army would somehow confront Hezbollah. The question is, the relationship may be a lot closer than we think.
Well,
do you want to take the first question?
Yes. It's interesting that Hamas left Damascus over Syria, and Hamas officials in Lebanon are protected by Hezbollah cadres. So they are mostly present in the Hezbollah security zone, and their guards are mostly Hezbollah guards. And recently, Sayyid Nasrallah referred in his last speech when he tried to reach out to the Sunni Islamist camp after the uproar they heard about Hezbollah's involvement in Syria, when he said, well, we are open to all kinds of dialogue, and there are fellow Islamist parties who are now trying to bridge the gap between us and come up with a solution. I'm willing to bet, I don't know, but I'm willing to bet Hamas is one such party. And there has been a dialogue, between and Hamas and other Sunni Islamist parties and Hezbollah over Syria, because the rift that had happened inside the Islamist camp along the Sunni Shiite line over Syria, but also over Bahrain, is much deeper than I think we understand. And it's a rift that became accentuated recently by Morsi's announcement, Sheikh Qaradawi's call on jihad, Sunnis to wage jihad against Assad and Hezbollah. And Hezbollah cares about that. I mean, this is part of their Arab back, and they understand very well that they are in the end they are a Shiite 99% majority, 90% Shiite party, and without that backing, that limits a lot the room for maneuvering inside Lebanon when it comes to other Sunnis. May 2008 was possible as far as Hezbollah's political calculus is concerned, because at the time they could rely on the Muslim Brotherhood of the world, and they could rely on Hamas of the world, they could rely on Qaradawi of the world to say, well, they had to do it, they did it surgically, quickly, but it never turned into a sectarian war, and that was because of the backing that that group gave them. This is no longer the case. This will shrink their room of maneuvering domestically, and it will impact how they operate in the rest of the Arab world. And so it's something they care about. It's not something they said, okay, we have to live with it. No, they have been working on it. In fact, the head of their Arab Affairs Department has been constantly going back and forth to Cairo to try to repair the rift with the Muslim Brotherhood leadership. You have this ongoing dialogue with Hamas and others over Syria, basically come to a modus operandi of, we are partners, but we agree to disagree on Syria. So that kind of dialogue will continue. And so Hamas calling on Hezbollah to leave Syria is understandable, given Hamas' position within the Sunni street, and also because Hamas, position inside Syria and vis-a-vis other Palestinians. But it doesn't mean, we should not interpret it as total breaking of relation between Hamas and Hezbollah. It's much more nuanced than this. The second, who controls the Lebanese army? I personally, as a Lebanese, I'm Lebanese American, but the Lebanese in me now is speaking, I found it extremely, a sorry state of affairs for Sunni March 14 leaders to come so vehemently against the Lebanese army. I mean, for God's sake, the only institution that's keeping this country together is the Lebanese army. No matter how frail it is, no matter how ill-equipped it might be, but it's the only institution that stands between Lebanon and the civil war, basically. And coming out, and this is coming from a party that has taken, that is part of its program and part of its agenda and part of it is raison d'etre, is state institution building. If the army is not a state institution that we need to build and encourage, I don't know what kind of state institution we need to build. However, it was a nuanced approach. They were trying to have it both ways, especially the Sunni in March 14. They were trying to say, well, we are against the attack against the army, but at the same time, the army needs to be fairer in how it deals with all military movements or military phenomena, including Hezbollah. Now, recently, today, in fact, there was this news. I don't know how many are familiar with the Syrian politics, but part of the raison that Assir used in justifying an attack on the Lebanese army is that, and on Hezbollah, it's something of the rallying cry, part of his rallying cry for the Sunnis in Sidon is this presence of what they call security apartments in areas close to his mosque. And these are apartments that are supposedly owned and bought and occupied by Hezbollah fighters or Hezbollah followers. Now, Hezbollah has admitted the presence of 2 apartments, one of which they bought for a martyr family, and the other is, for students who are Hezbollah followers who are studying in universities in Sidons. Bahia Hariri, the MP, the member of the parliament, sister of the late Rafiq Hariri, at the end of the Sidon events came out and said, they have to vacate this apartment. They have to end that presence in Sidon. And today, Hezbollah has decided to give up 1 apartment. Now, is it a gesture or is it basically a goodwill gesture to Bahia? It's just because they felt it has no value anymore. Assir is gone, so there is no need to have that kind of presence next to his mosque. It could be both, but it's a gesture that I think will help in alleviating some of that anger. Again, the question of who controls the Lebanese army, this is a fair question, but I have come to meet a lot of Lebanese army officers, and including Shia army officers, and I'm always struck by the success that the military institution has achieved in really creating a professional soldier. I mean, there is this identity of being a member of the Lebanese armed forces. Now, their Shiite identity is equally important, but the identity of being a member of the Lebanese armed forces, for at least the ones I interacted with, is equally important to them as a Shiite identity. And in fact, when you talk with the recruitment efforts that are being undertaken in order to recruit officers corps, for the officers corps, every year the military academy opens its effort to recruit an officer corps. And typical to Lebanon, every year the officer class has to have the confessional configuration, ex-Maronite, ex-Shiite. And many of the recruiters tell me they have a hard time getting Sunni to enlist to the officers corps. They have no problem getting, Shia. I'm not talking about rank and file. I'm talking about the officer corps for the military academy, because being a soldier, being a professional soldier, is not seen by the Sunni as a sign of social mobility and economic empowerment. Whereas for a lot of the Shia, in fact, the Shia community is today, with respect to the army, and I'm talking about in general, where the Maronite used to be with the army years ago. In the past, for the Maronite, being a general or a colonel in the army is making it. This is a sign of having achieved it. And every big family in Lebanon, Christian family, had somebody in the army. Today it is the case. This is a mentality inside Shiite families that it is, and that's, in my opinion, that's a phenomenon that we need to develop and nurture, because this is part of the the kind of political mobilization of the Shia that we have been trying to push for year and year by arguing for the Lebanization of Hezbollah, but rather by, what I'm arguing for is political mobilization into the Lebanese armed forces of the Sunni. We are seeing the exact opposite phenomenon happening with the Sunni community. They are moving away from these state institutions, and that's why what I'm afraid of, especially within this poor and rural urban areas, is we are seeing the same phenomenon, and I argued about that about a year and a half ago in a piece in Al Monitor. When you look at the message of Al-Asir, of Daesh, Shahal, and others, it's exactly the same message that Musa Sadr used in the 60s and 70s to form Amal. We are now seeing the same kind of message of political marginalization, anger, driving the Sunni community, that is going to lead to the formation of the Amal-like movements or the Hezbollah-like movement in the Sunni community.
I want to wrap up with two questions from the overflow room. We're running out of time. So one question, what would be the effect of Asir's arrest? Would it mobilize the Sunni streets? Or that sort of ties into what you've been talking about. We even know where he is. And this is from Mohammed of the Syrian American Alliance. Is the regime, I presume the Assad regime / Hezbollah's continued targeting of Sunnis part of a larger ethnic cleansing? Maybe comment on
Syria.
In Syria, the role of sort of violence and its impact.
Okay, the first, I don't know where Al-Asir is, and I don't know if he's still in Lebanon. Rumors abound. He's in Ain al-Hilwa. He fled by sea to Tripoli. He went to, Syria from Tripoli and joined the Free Syrian Army. And I tweeted, and here I'm making a joke, is that years ago, Bashar al-Assad sent us this great gift called Shakir al-Absi, the leader of Fatah al-Islam. And so now the Lebanese are returning the favor, and we are sending him, Al-Asir, so one for one. I don't know where he is. I think how he's captured, and I hope he gets captured. If he gets killed, then definitely we have the making of a martyr, and we don't want that. I hope he gets captured, and I hope he gets tried, and in a fair trial, and I hope that they bring international lawyers for him, maybe Arab lawyers, to guarantee the neutrality of the trial and the fact that he has due representation. And Asir had to be brought down to size. Asir articulates anger, but it's not the best way to articulate the Sunni anger. I think Hariri and others remain the best face of Sunni political representation and the best face of Sunni political actors in Lebanon. Otherwise, if more and more Assyrians are going to be the rulers of the Sunni community, then God help Lebanon. And so I wish he gets captured, and I wish he's tried like any other criminals who kills who kills Lebanese soldiers. He has to be tried for his murder, for his assassination, for his act. In terms of
the question of Hezbollah's role in the violence in Syria, maybe to take the question a step further, would be how does Hezbollah's role in the killing actually shape or harm its overall image and credibility? Maybe that'd be how to take the question a step further.
Can you repeat this?
So the question is basically, what is Hezbollah's role? Are they part of a larger ethnic cleansing of Sunnis? But maybe we can take that question a little further and ask about the impact of Hezbollah's role in the violence in Syria on Hezbollah's image and place in...
Yeah, I know. I think eventually, the more they get involved, I think Hezbollah will somehow get involved or be accused of committing some of these massacres if they stay in Syria. And that is going to be really, really bad in terms of domestic politics. I don't know how they can avoid that kind of accusation the longer they stay in Syria. Whether it's, the Syrian regime has shown that there is a policy being executed of basically committing massacres in one or two villages and then hoping and sending fears for that area, which is usually a Sunni majority area, to be cleared, because people then will flee for their lives on their own without getting killed by the Syrian regime. But that has been, now whether Hezbollah will play that card and be accused of it, I think the longer he stays in Syria, the longer the possibility that he will not necessarily play the card, and I don't know if he will play that card, but of getting accused of it and being involved in it.
Certainly accused of getting his hands very dirty and bloody and all
of course.
This.
You cannot escape it. You cannot. They are not going to be able to escape it. And so the bets now inside the Shiite communities, and that's really a strong bet among many, is for Hezbollah to get out, saying, we have done what we need to do and we need to get out. Jumblat, in fact, even made a similar statement not long time ago, hoping that Hezbollah will come to that conclusion. And the way he put it, if I'm not wrong, Hezbollah to come back to its Lebanese roots. Looking at Nasrallah's last speech, I think they are looking at a long-term involvement. I don't think they are looking at a short-term involvement. I think they look at it as an existential fight that will require them to stay there, no matter, however, how long it will take. And so that's the reading I have from his last speech.
I'm starting to think of it as Hezbollah's Vietnam. And on that note, I'd like to please join me in thanking Randa Slim for this amazing presentation.